Good evening. Welcome to my podcast where we talk about how to live happier, healthier, and more productive lives while on quarantine. For this evening's episode, I wanted to talk about the next step, phase 2, which we here in Austria have already entered and which many other countries around the world will be hopefully entering in the coming weeks, if not months ahead. So phase 1 was all about the government locking down and getting a control and a handle over the spread of coronavirus. Phase 2 is about slowly allowing us further privileges so that our social and normal lives can get back on track and the economy can get back on track so that we can move forward and hopefully out of the major restrictions that most of us have faced in the preceding weeks. As restrictions will be lifted, we're going to see a bit of a yo-yo effect where the government determines how different restrictions have an impact on the transmission, the contagion of the virus, and thus how exactly they should respond so that they keep the contagion rate at one that their healthcare system can handle. There are two main factors that will go into determining phase 2 lifting of restrictions. The first is your country's health system. This includes the ability to respond to regular health needs and also those requiring acute care because of coronavirus. This would also include the level of testing, how many tests are available, and the personnel in order to carry out those tests, as well as perhaps the usage of monitoring apps on your smartphone so that the government is able to track the contagion of the virus through that means as well, through your social contacts. This is an area that I also have privacy concerns, as well as many human rights and other organizations. But luckily, the governments who are moving furthest ahead on this are taking this seriously into consideration and will hopefully have apps available once they're rolled out that minimize many of the security and privacy concerns and keep the data safe and anonymous. 2 is the population. The density of the population, the overall size, the health of the population, how many people have other underlying or respiratory illnesses, how many old people there are who might be, or other people who are more vulnerable, and the level of immunity. Places like Sweden that are trying to do a herd immunity approach might see lifting of restrictions earlier because a higher percentage of the population is immunized to the virus, if the idea that catching corona results in immunity afterwards, which isn't actually proven yet, so that's a wait and see. Of course, once the vaccines are available, it'll be a question how quickly the government can get these vaccines out into people and thus the level of immunity due to that. So based on these factors, there's a whole series of different restrictions that will be lifted in each of our countries in a different order, and sometimes they'll be put back in place in parallel with safety measures to ensure that each step only results in a very minimal increase in the number of people who could possibly be put at risk of contracting the virus. So for instance, the usage of face masks will be one that that is already in countries such as this one been promoted and will likely see in more places as more face masks are made available, are produced and delivered to point of sale providers. But we first have to ensure there's enough face masks for those who really need it, those who are most vulnerable, and those who have to be in contact with the most number of people, especially those who are the highest likelihood of having the virus. So healthcare workers first, but then other people who are working in the security sector, those in grocery stores, and this basically anybody who has to come in contact with quite a few people need those masks before you and I, who might not come into contact with that many people on a daily basis and should more be looking at how to reduce the number of contact that we have. Additional to face masks, we'll probably see a lot more usage of hand sanitizer in public spaces. so that when you enter a building or an elevator or some other door that can't be opened through automatic door openers that we'll hopefully see more of, we'll also see those hand sanitizers available so that everybody can decontaminate themselves on a more regular basis. Now, in terms of what we're going to see is first a focus on those economic sectors that don't require a lot of human contact, so that we can get private industry rolling a bit quicker where it's most safe to do so, where the most benefit is for the risk of human contagion of coronavirus. So natural resource sector, for instance, anything in ICT are areas that we'll probably see the quickest opening up. So after these sectors that require almost no human contacts will be those that require very little human contact. So for instance, those that are selling good versus those that are selling a service, which usually require human-to-human contact, unless it is within ICT or the digital realm. So here what we've seen is that smaller shops have been able to open earlier as there's less people in a given space and thus less risk of multiple contractions of the virus if one person happens to be infected. And so there's a good chance that this is what others might see in other places as well first, and then basically progressively going to larger size stores where we might see more people, but at the same time, possibly also restrictions on the number of people who can enter the store at any given time. Restaurants, currently most have tried to move to a delivery model. More will see takeout in the coming weeks because this is also an area where there's less contagion than in a regular restaurant. And after that, perhaps outdoor seating before we move to traditional indoor seating, especially in high density situations. So when we do move towards indoor seating, what you might see is that instead of being able to fill every table, is that they'll only be allowed to have people at every second table, and or that the wait service staff have to wear masks when engaging with customers in order to, again, reduce the risk of spread. Aside from shops and restaurants, museums will probably be pretty early on, as human-to-human contact isn't a necessity of a lot of what you're doing in a museum, as long as people keep their distance when looking at exhibitions, and tours will likely also not be able to be put back on until a bit later. Schools, of course, is one of the most important things for many of us who have children at home, and I think most parents are looking forward to the day that their kids can go back to school, no matter what age. And this might be also not only a slow process, but one where the regular model can't be utilized in the same way. And so instead of having people in desks close together, they might try to open up classrooms so that people can sit further apart, might try to have more air circulation, classes outdoors, teaching children how to decontaminate their hands regularly. Perhaps recess won't be allowed the same way at first. And so when we do see schools open up again, don't expect them to be exactly the same life for your kids at school as they had before. Libraries hopefully will also open sooner rather than later, as the human-to-human contact isn't large, and they'll just have to have disinfecting processes put in place for books that are returned so that there's not a risk of touching a book on the shelf that somebody else with coronavirus had before you and projecting it that way. So there's a lot of learning to behave in a different way as we open up any of these services to reduce the contagion, especially in higher risk environments. As these restrictions on our lives are removed, we'll also see different sectors of the economy rebound to different degrees. The ICT sector has barely actually slumped in some respects. It's gone up. Digital marketing, for instance, has actually seen an increase of services rendered during this time. Others, such as travel, will take a whole lot longer, and then specific components of travel will come back online quicker than others. I don't expect cruise travel to really pick up for quite a while, while car trips, bike trips, hiking, that kind of thing, where people enjoy travel, but without coming into contact with a lot of people, will be much earlier than festivals, for instance, or group tours or other types of tourism that require coming together with a lot of people at once. So seeing the Eiffel Tower, Dubrovnik, or the Great Wall of China might not be possible the same way as it has before with the throngs of crowds, but they might open these up to a few people at a time with pre-scheduled appointments or this kind of thing, so that the sites can open up, so that hotels and restaurants can start benefiting from the tourism, but without the same risks of transmission as what we've had before. I don't expect borders to be closed that much longer, especially between countries that have managed to get a handle on the virus. So if two countries side by side have managed to plank the curve and start reducing restrictions, then I would also foresee those borders opening up between those two countries quite quickly. And this current reality of closed borders across the world won't be maintained for much longer into the future, as generally countries benefit a lot from trade with their neighbors, and so the borders being closed has impacted them quite severely in a negative way. Sports is a bit of a crapshoot, because individual sports are something that they'll allow soon enough, and we're seeing here that biking and hiking and golf, paddle sports, sailing, these things are going to be allowed a lot earlier than team sports. And then team sports might first be allowed for professional teams because they can more easily regulate the specifics of isolation rules, including not having any crowds watching them, than they can with amateur teams, and where it's maybe less worth it economically to also open up, unfortunately. That's probably part of the argument. So here we're expecting that the professional teams will be allowed to play, but not in front of spectators live, and amateurs won't be able to play their own sports until probably after this summer. Industries such as oil and gas will do better than what they're currently doing, considering right now the price of oil is in the negative for the first time in my life, as far as I know. But it's unlikely to bound back to what it has reached in the past. This is my prognosis, because I believe travel will be reduced for a long time to come. We'll accept more technologies, as we have been the last few years, that don't require as much usage of fossil fuels in order to get around. And I think we hit peak travel in February, and I will never see that number of flights perhaps ever again, or at least for a number of years. And people will likely choose other forms of transport that won't require them to be in as close proximity to others as in an airplane. So I expect to see more train travel, more car travel, more individual, like cycling, walking, that kind of thing, and less public transport, less cruise ships, less flights. So that's where I kind of see the travel industry headed. Finally, I do see some things rebounding differently and quite positively. So therapists are going to do great for the next number of months. The baby boom, I think we should expect in 8 months from now, as people are at home without a lot to do, and there's a good chance that we'll see a lot more babies come late in the year. And all those companies producing moisturizers are going to do just as well as those producing face masks and disinfectants and the other things that we need, because people's hands are trying out from using disinfectants a few dozen times a day, and so do invest in any moisturizer companies that you might know. So those are my ideas on phase 2 of the coronavirus response. Hopefully these will provide useful to you, so that you have a bit of a better idea of how things should shake up in the months ahead, and how, although we saw abrupt change from normal to what we're now facing, how you can expect that the new normal will take a bit of time, and that it will be piece by piece process sometimes, mostly forward, but sometimes a step back in order to make another 2 steps forward. So good luck out there, stay safe, and thank you for joining me on my vlog when we're talking about ways to make our lives happier, healthier, and more productive while under quarantine. Thank you. Have a good night. Hi, Romeo. How are you? Hi. Do you want to talk about coronavirus? No, you want to talk about ball? Okay, that's great.